Breaking news today: the NATO alliance just gave Putin a body blow. Allies at this week's NATO summit remained as unified as ever against Putin's war in Ukraine and announced plans to expand the alliance and increase defense spending, dealing a significant blow to the Russian president. On the eve of the summit, Putin suffered his greatest defeat when Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan reached an agreement with Sweden's government to allow the country to join NATO. This about-face by Erdogan not only positions Turkey to become a full member of the Western Security Alliance but also indicates a shift in Turkey's leadership away from Putin and toward the West. He's no longer interested in being dependent on Putin economically and strategically, said Asli Aydıntasbaz, a visiting fellow at the Brookings Institution with the Turkey Project. The Russians, I believe, are quite displeased. My guess is that the Kremlin is very displeased. It gave President Biden a major victory leading up to the high-profile summit in Vilnius, Lithuania, and it helped repair Turkey's strained relations with its NATO allies. NATO, Biden said at the end of the summit, is more united than ever before in its history. We will not waver, Biden said in his Wednesday speech. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. We will continue to fight for freedom and democracy as long as it is necessary. The Kremlin was enraged by Erdogan's decision to release Ukrainian prisoners of war from the Azov regiment just days before Turkey was approved as a safe haven for them by Sweden. While the Sweden deal was probably expected, Aydıntasbaz has said that the release of the prisoners is even more devastating. She concluded that Putin's weakness, especially in the wake of the Wagner uprising, has prompted the Turkish leader to move closer to Biden. I wouldn't call this a reset, but it lays the groundwork for a reset between the West and Turkey, and that would be a big deal, she continued. Because Turkey is NATO's second-largest army and its drift away from the West has been a big issue. However, Aydıntasbaz admitted that Erdogan frequently makes deals for transactional benefits, and that he is likely to continue to play both sides of the Ukraine war because he does not see it as a binary issue. Turkey's EU membership hopes and increased counter-terrorism operations were among the concessions Erdogan demanded from the West before he would back Sweden. The United States announced the delayed sale of F-16 fighter jets to Turkey would go ahead a day after the agreement with Sweden, so Erdogan may have also won a deal to purchase these planes to modernize his air force. The alliance and its support for Ukraine will be strengthened by the commitment made at the summit to increase defense spending levels. Members are now promising to allocate at least 2% of GDP to defense and national security spending. NATO has spent years attempting to solidify this pledge, but to no avail. The total spending by Canada and Europe increased by 8.3% this past year, but Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said 11 allies have now reached or exceeded the target. This is the biggest increase in decades, Stoltenberg remarked. And we anticipate a sizable increase in this number over the course of the next year. According to Republican presidential candidate and ex-United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley, Biden made Putin's day by refusing to commit to Kyiv's future NATO membership despite the fact that Putin secured a minor victory in the dashing of Ukraine's NATO aspirations. At the end of the summit, however, the United States and Ukraine worked to mitigate the situation. Ukraine claims that NATO's decision not to fast-track Kyiv's entry into the alliance or to set a clear timeline for membership will only embolden Russia and allow Moscow to use inclusion into the alliance as a bargaining chip in peace talks. A procedural barrier was removed, a NATO-Ukraine Council was established, and it was reaffirmed that Kyiv is closer than ever to membership in the alliance. President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine, who had previously voiced his dissatisfaction with the membership process, claimed to have had a powerful meeting with Vice President Joe Biden on Wednesday. According to a tweet by Zelensky, the meeting was at least twice as long as planned, and it was as meaningful as it needed to be. We would have talked even longer if the protocol hadn't cut the meeting short. Moscow's hopes of weakening Western support for the war were dampened this week when NATO allies announced major steps toward supporting Ukraine in the long run. The Group of Seven, G7, economic and political bloc announced a long-term security commitment for Kyiv, and a coalition of 11 NATO countries set a date in August for F-16 training for Ukrainian pilots. France also confirmed the shipment of much-needed long-range missiles for Ukraine. Russia has attempted to play down the summit's significance. State-run TASS reported that the head of Moscow's Foreign Intelligence Service said the summit didn't bring any surprise to Russia. The Council on Foreign Relations Europe fellow Liana Fix, however, argues that Russia's efforts to undermine the narrative have largely been unsuccessful. From a Russian propaganda perspective, it makes sense to downplay this as much as possible, she explained. But the facts just speak against Russia, the author writes, especially the long-term commitment of G7 members to deter Russia and to erode the optimism in the Kremlin, hoping everyone in Europe gets tired. Even though there are worries about a lagging counteroffensive launched in early June and the prospect of a longer war, the Vilnius summit demonstrated that allies are standing by Ukraine, Fix said. At the beginning of this year, the messaging was all about Ukraine, and what it means for this one counteroffensive this year, she said. As a result, and I think that was recognized as a bit of a trap. As such, this is, sort of an attempt to make clear that the commitment is not only until the end of this year, but the commitment will also extend into the next year.